Thank you. I'm going to start with my 4.5-year-old son. If I'm lucky, by the time I die, he'll be about the age that I am now. If I could see him now as he'll be then, I really don't know the degree to which I'll recognize his behavior as human. A couple of years ago, I bought a touchscreen tablet. I showed him a cartoon on it. When it had finished, he pressed the thumbnail of the cartoon that he wanted to watch next. That correct and instinctive action, I think, has profound implications. And it's just the start of what I think of as the disappearance of the boundary between the physical world and information systems. This headset that I'm wearing in the bottom right can interpret the magnetic waves created by my thoughts and draw instructions from those magnetic waves and can give them as commands to computer systems. A woman has controlled a robotic arm using this technology. So my thoughts can influence the world of information, and the world of information can influence the physical world, whether that's through sensors and actuators implanted in our own bodies, as Professor Kevin Warwick has been experimenting with in Reading for many years now, or whether it's through 3D printing physical objects such as prosthetic limbs, or even living tissues such as skin and muscle fibers, both of which have been printed from individual cells using these techniques. So we've become used, I think, to, over the past few decades, information technology disrupting our communications. From the telephone to email to social media, they've changed more and more quickly. As these technologies become more everyday, they're going to change the way we interact with the physical world in striking ways, and that's going to happen more quickly too. And these striking capabilities occur at a time that we have the striking challenges that we've been hearing about in the context of our cities. We started building cities upwards around the lifts powered by the steam engine invented by James Watt and commercialized by Matthew Boulton in Birmingham in the Industrial Revolution. Then for the last century, as we've just heard, we've been building them outwards around the car. A question and our choice is what happens as we start building these cities around the information systems that are available. And I think we can feel some of the challenges we need to address right now, as well as the price of energy going up. The price of food has gone up relative to income in the last few years. And that's because we have competition for the world's grain between growing populations needing food and needing fuels such as bioethanol. So we have real choices to make in how we address these challenges and how we try to use them to use these capabilities to fashion a society that's ethical and sympathetic to us as human beings. And I think there are three trends we can look to: urbanism and technology and the research of resilient systems in solving them. The first is for little things and big things to work together. So I've got on this page some interventions in the physical environment in cities, starting with Birmingham's Ring Road, constructed to support the post-war economy so that cars could get around the city. But it physically strangled the growth of the city centre. It wasn't compatible with the needs of the little people who lived there. We're now experimenting with Exhibition Road, which knits the city together in London, or this elevated pedestrian roundabout in China, which protects the fluidity of movement of walking and riding bicycles, modes of transport in which it's easy to stop and interact with city systems. So these are big infrastructures which are compatible with the needs of the little people who inhabit the city around them, who are the reason for its existence. The same challenge applies to technology infrastructures. We can do a lot with information in cities. We can measure the position of cars and the concentration of carbon monoxide. We can turn that into information about how fast traffic is flowing and about the level of emissions from buildings. And we can turn that into insight about a city's performance, the impact on life expectancy of the quality of the environment, or the impact of congestion on the economy. And as a result, cities are rushing to invest in 3G and 4G and broadband infrastructures to move all of this data about. But the danger is that these are the big infrastructures of the information age. What use is broadband connectivity in an area with low economic activity if the people and businesses there can't afford subscriptions to it, or if they don't have the computer programming skills that you need to make sense of data and draw uses from it? How can we adapt these big information infrastructures to the needs of little people, little organizations and communities? So the place to start is not with infrastructure, it's with places and people. The infrastructures that are successful in doing this aren't just deployed, they're co-created in a process of design by listening to communities. It requires us to visit new places like the Container City incubation facility for social enterprise in Sunderland, and learn new language and learn new values such as the triple bottom line of social, environmental and financial capital that social enterprises audit themselves against. In Dublin, this process has led to a collaboration between the City Council and surrounding county councils, the National University of Ireland, and public and private sector providers to the city, where 3,000 data sets are now being shared about systems such as the city's water supply and transportation. It's yielding research insight into new ways that the city's systems can behave and how its water system can support new houses without any increase in physical capacity. And it's leading to all these innovations similar to Amsterdam in new applications, some of which are now being started by businesses winning venture capital to back them. And so by engaging in a process like this, you enable the design of services that can become part of the fabric of life and enable new choices and inform those choices based on the impact that they're about to have. In projects in Singapore, California and elsewhere, we've used algorithms that can predict the flow of traffic an hour in advance with about 85–90% accuracy, can tell you about how traffic flow and traffic volume are going to change and where congestion will occur in the future. In San Francisco, we gave that information to commuters every day so that before they set out on their journey, they were told how long that journey was likely to be and whether it would be impacted by congestion that perhaps hadn't occurred yet. That gives a new opportunity to choose to take a different route to work, use a different mode of transport, travel at a different time, or even not to travel at all. And as well as appealing to selfish motivation, we can appeal to a sense of community and place. This is a smart water meter from Dubuque in Iowa, and it's showing information that can tell you whether your washing machine's working inefficiently because it needs servicing, or whether there's a weak underlying signal that shows that you've got a leak somewhere. And when we're given this information, to an extent, we choose to act on it. But something remarkable happened in a controlled experiment where some households were given the green points score that you see in the top right. That compares this household's conservation performance to an aggregate of its neighbours. And when we gave that information to people, they were literally twice as likely to make changes in their behaviour, resulting in an improvement in their conservation performance. And this isn't an isolated example. Other studies have shown a similar effect. Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that once our personal physical needs are taken care of, we care next about those around us, our families, our communities, and our peers. And we can design systems that appeal to them, appeal directly to those values. And the information that we use to do this is all around us. It's why the second trend appears, and we're all now producers and consumers of this information. Every time we share a photograph in social media, when we buy or sell in an online marketplace, or use a recommendation engine to find new music. As that boundary between the physical world and information systems disappears, we'll see new industries and markets disrupted in a similar way. Technology gives us the ability to create relationships in the supply chain, relationships between producers and consumers, much more flexibly and rapidly. We're seeing it already in food production, in transport resources such as journeys in cars and parking spaces, and we're seeing it in the manufacture of custom goods. So the image on the bottom left is taken from Shapeways, where you can 3D print pretty much anything that you like, and the cost of this technology is coming down. At the same time, these marketplaces are transactional, and we've got interesting opportunities to affect the rate of exchange used in those transactions. There's an alternative currency that's been in use in Switzerland for nearly 100 years now, the weir, that's thought to have contributed to economic stability there. I suspect with someone from the LSE chairing the debate, we may have a comment on that. 5 towns and cities in the UK have their own local currencies now, with similar intentions, and they're increasingly using advanced technology to support those currencies, such as the droplet smartphone payment system that's been created in Birmingham. These rates of exchange offer us the possibility to compare the complete cost of goods and services, the financial cost and their social and environmental implications, with dynamic, highly localized value to the participants, what it's worth to me now to have this service, rather than what it might be worth me to have it in 2 weeks' time when I really need it. I think there's tremendous potential here to produce new information-based marketplaces that could support more sustainable city systems. But if there's such a good idea, why don't we have them ubiquitously already? And that comes down to something that's been mentioned by the other speakers. Where cities are making progress on this agenda, it's where they're coordinating the use of their public sector and private sector assets towards a co-created vision, towards a common set of goals and objectives. But in order to win that level of commitment, you don't only need the buy-in of the leaders and managers of those resources, you need the understanding of all of the stakeholders that they're accountable to, their employees, the electorate, their shareholders. To appeal to that tremendously broad set of interests, we need to, I think, to appeal to some common instincts amongst us all, a sense of narrative and our ability to empathize, rather than focus on the financial efficiencies created by smart infrastructures. And if we do that, we may not get very far because smart ideas cut across silos, so those who realize the benefits may not be those who are asked to make the investment in the first case. Instead, we should be concentrating on the social and personal and community value that can be created when people can afford to buy better food, where they can afford to heat their homes properly in winter, when they have access to affordable transport to places of employment. Excuse me. And so we need to start telling stories about how our lives in smarter cities might get better in order to win that support of people in donating their time and ultimately their resources towards creating them. I'm pretty much done. I think it's absolutely imperative for us to find these stories and to tell them, because the changes that we face in coming decades are going to be so fast and so profound that cities who don't embrace them successfully won't succeed and could suffer not just stagnation but actually quite worrying levels of decline. Luckily, I think our ability to do so depends in the first case on a technology that's freely available to all of us, language used face-to-face in conversations. And personally, I can't think of a more essential challenge than to start using it to tell these stories about how our smarter cities could create a fairer, more sustainable world. Thanks very much.
What you've said begs the question of how cities and their governments, those who are responsible, help the broad mass of citizens come to terms with the kind of changes you've just outlined, or some of them. I mean, some of them are self-evident, but many of them are not self-evident to many people, and certainly not to people who are less adept at handling technology. So I suppose the question that immediately springs to my mind is how should, or would you imagine, how would you advise cities to handle all these very radical technological advances which will indeed shape the way cities develop and function?
So a very similar question was asked in Birmingham's Smart City Commission, and it was answered with the initially surprising response, have more cups of tea. And this was from an entrepreneur who's very successfully runs social media surgeries in Birmingham, has done for many years. He simply goes to communities where they are and has conversations with them. And those conversations yield insight into how social media could help those communities. And by approaching it in that very particular down-to-earth, simple way, he has constructive conversations that create new understanding. It's a very soft idea, but I think a very important one.
Does it matter that many of the people who run cities are perhaps less adept at using new technology than people 20 or 30 years younger might be?
I think it does matter. I don't think it's necessarily an insurmountable problem. I think the iPad example, the tablet example is a very interesting one. I've seen all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life who I'd never imagined would walk into a meeting with a laptop, walk into a meeting with a touchscreen tablet, because it connects us to information in a way that's much more human and much less of a barrier. So yes, I do think all of us need to be much more aware of technology and how it's used, but I don't think it's necessarily difficult to do that.
Okay. Rick, thank you very much.
Thank you.